Shamba. I've scored 644 in the NEET UG 2024 examination, and this video is nothing but a continuation of the strategy series. And in this video, we'll be covering up the next chapter, that is body fluids and circulation. This chapter is mostly based on flow charts. You can take help of these while you revise, especially while doing your written revisions, and you can eventually get into the habit of making short notes or notes in this process, which will result in effective learning and in memory retention of the text which you have read. So without any delay, let's straight away get into the underrated topics. First, introduction. There are just two statements. Firstly, that simple organisms like sponges and ciliates, their body circulation is mentioned, and then we have it compared with the body fluids and circulation in the most complex organisms, which happens with the help of blood. Now, blood is most commonly used by most of the higher organisms. So these two lines are very important for your statement-based questions. Now, getting on to the next underrated topic, that is coagulation of blood. Now, let me tell you why. Why did I say that it's underrated? Not that people would leave that part, but people wouldn't read it the way it's required to be. If you look into the passage which is dedicated to this topic, coagulation of blood, NCERT kind of writes it in the way that it starts off from how the clot, from the clot formation, and it ends, the passage ends with the causes or the reasons or the beginning of clot formation. But you need to understand it in the proper sequence. So whenever you make notes, you make sure that you write down the entire mechanism of clotting, how it actually starts off, that it starts off because of the release of certain factors, both by the platelets at the site of injury and those tissues at the site of injury, and it finally ends up in the formation of soft clot. Now, soft clot is nothing but fibrin and other things which are mentioned. Read it properly, and then we have the hard clot formed, which is that reddish brown scum, the hard clot. And getting on to the next underrated topic, ECG. Now, most of the people pay attention just to the diagram and the theory related to the diagram of ECG. But there are more to it. We often tend to skip the important parts like how many electrical leads are to be used, what are the positions in which the electrical leads of an ECG need to be attached to. And there is one point which I missed, that is the ECG diagram which is given is of a standard ECG. And if you read properly through the text of NCERT, if you want a detailed evaluation of the heart's activities, then you can go for like many other electrical leads which are to be attached to the chest region for even a more detailed ECG. But the one which we study in the book, that is just a standard ECG. And that when you have 3 leads attached, 2 to the wrist, 1 to the left ankle, that is just for the standard ECG. The first line, you should always know that when I say ECG, what do I actually mean? Is it electrocardiograph or is it electrocardiogram? And what is the difference between the two terms I mentioned? That is for you to find out from the very first lines which are mentioned. You can use the pen technique, like while I used to do my PW classes, we had our organic chemistry teacher, and later on, I guess in the drop year, he taught us physical chemistry. That is Amit Mahajan sir. He introduced us to the pen technique. That is, in case you lose attention or you get distracted quite often while reading, what you can do is that start reading with a pen, point at all the words and go through everything. So whenever you pick up the pen, you get alarmed, I'm getting distracted. Okay, approach per topic. Firstly, let's start off plasma. Now this entire thing, right from plasma to studying all the RBCs, WBCs and platelets, there is a lot of numerical data, like the percentage division of the composition, or how many days does a particular cell last, how many numbers of a particular type of cells are present. So for studying such kind of data, what you can do is that form a branch type of flowchart, like comprising of categories and subcategories. Like for plasma, as you can already see in my notes page, just categorize it into its particular components. Like we can start right from water, then proteins, and then the kinds of proteins which are there, learn it with the functions of the respective proteins, then go on to minerals. Now one line which I would like to mention, pay attention to the line, like it may be an ignored line, but who can say it may pop up as a statement-based question in your next mock test paper. This one, that glucose, amino acids and lipids are always there in the plasma because they are always in transit. Now take it as a statement-based question or an assertion reasoning question, both help. But pay attention to the line because I thought like it might be a line which may be overlooked by many students, because I definitely did overlook this line. And it came into one of the mock tests in paper, and at that point of time I was like, oh, I missed it. So I'm just alarming you guys of all the points which I missed, all the lines which I overlooked, in case it helps. Then getting to formed elements, just that way form the categories and the subcategories. I have already displayed the notes for it. For erythrocytes, do not miss a single point. Write down all the points in bullets in your notes copy. All of them should be there. And pay attention to the line where it talks about the bone marrow thing. That is, RBCs are formed in the bone marrow, but it's only in adults. What happens is that we are so caught up in paying attention to the big details, that is, we often leave out the small details. We would learn that, okay, there is RBC, and where are RBCs from? Bone marrow. But we don't pay attention to the next two words, that is, in adults. It also happens when you're reading the question paper. Let's say that you read in adults. Now you're very much aware that RBC formation in adults and embryos are different. You go to attempt your question paper. You don't pay attention to reading the question paper properly. You saw in the question paper there was given RBCs, there was given bone marrow, and you marked it as a true one. But maybe you didn't see it was written after all in embryo, right? Similarly, we have leukocytes. It's needless to mention that you should learn how the different components, that is, both the granulocytes and the agranulocytes, how they differ in composition. And there is a thin line of difference in relation to allergic reactions for eosinophils and basophils. Why? Let me tell you. Because basophils promote allergic kind of reactions in the body. They are the ones which help to secrete histamine and heparin and serotonin. They are involved in inflammatory reactions. But eosinophils, they are against allergic reactions. Alright? Now getting to the next topic, that is ABO grouping. For ABO grouping, just pay attention to the table and few lines. Like the first line in the passage, which reads like, that ABO grouping is dependent on the two surface antigens, that is A and B. What are surface antigens? And these are the surface antigens on RBCs. That is an important thing to focus on. And then what is clumping? What leads to clumping? Which blood group is the universal donor, which is the universal acceptor, and why they are so? Important points to remember. Then we have the next topic about blood grouping, that is the case of erythroblastosis fetalis. Now, needless to say that you need to learn everything about the RH group. That's like it's given in few lines at the very beginning of the passage. That is, how many humans, what is the percentage of humans which do have RH positive blood, and why do we have it termed as the RH group? You definitely need to learn that. But for erythroblastosis fetalis, one point on which a lot of MCQs are based on, that is like who between the mother and the child has to be RH negative and who has to be RH positive. A lot of questions are based on it, and it's my opinion that the entire case of erythroblastosis fetalis needs to be studied in a very sequential manner. That what action leads to the other one, and how fatalities, how the kid is affected towards the end, and also what is the recovery. Then getting to coagulation of blood. Now for coagulation of blood, I guess I already mentioned it before. Lymph, circulatory pathway, you need to go through every single line. Every line is important over there. Now for human circulatory system, in the very first, the second passage where they talk about heart and they talk about the different chambers of the heart, they talk about the valves of the heart. You need to study everything separately, and later on this topic continues to talk about the nodes which are present in the heart. Firstly, for the valves, write it on a short piece of paper, staple it on your book or on your notes page, wherever you want to. That is, which valve is present where, and what is the difference between bicuspid and tricuspid valve. Do read it. Now getting to a very important point, that is the different kind of septa. We have the interatrial septum, we have the interventricular septum, and we also have the atrioventricular septum. Now these three are very different in their structures. Like I think when we are talking about the interatrial septum, it's written that it's in the form of a thin muscular wall. The interventricular septum, which is thick-walled, and the atrioventricular septum, which is a thick fibrous tissue. Now getting on to the nodes, you must learn everything and what are the locations of each nodal tissue. Remember, we have 4 nodal tissues described over here. We have the SAN, and we have the AVN, then we have the AV bundle, then we have the Purkinje fibers. Now, you would definitely go through these and their particular functions, but one important line from the NCERT, which even I have got highlighted, is that the number of action potentials that could be generated in a minute vary at different parts of the nodal system. This line must be highlighted because this is a very this line has the potential to appear in one of your statement-based questions. And getting on to cardiac cycle, I have attached my notes here with, as you can already see. And in order to study cardiac cycle, I think it's a must for every student to study it in this way. To know that when the first heart sound occurs and when does the second one happen, and definitely how does the atrial systole, the atrial diastole, ventricular systole, ventricular diastole, and joint diastole state, how do they actually happen? What are the points in which maybe two things are happening at the same time? The timing, arrangement, and how they differ. Every time when I would get to this paragraph, I would never understand till I did MD Sir's UNEET class. Okay, and I got to know that this is a very simple way to get this into your head. And every time I would get back to revise this chapter, I would definitely open this page of my notes book to get through this topic. Then I definitely mentioned ECG. Then getting to double circulation. I guess I don't even remember the number of times I did a mistake in the first para. Like I used to read it every time, but still I would get confused. The three different layers of arteries and veins, and which layer is thinner in veins, that is the tunica media, which is comparatively thin in the veins. These three layers and their composition, and which one is thinner in the veins. That part is very important, undoubtedly. Then you have got the different kind of circulation. Just give a reading to it and you'll be okay with it. They also talk about the hepatic portal system, and they talk about the coronary system, which are different from the systemic circulation or the pulmonary circulation. Then we have regulation of cardiac activity. Now look, for regulation, again, prepare a flow chart. As you can already see, I have done for regulation, split it. Like we have first have the auto-regulation or the intrinsic regulation, then we have the neural regulation, then we have the chemical regulation. Write down all the points, and you have to split down the neural regulation into how the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system control it. Moving on to disorders. Now here I made one mistake again, I remember. High blood pressure. This from this paragraph, you'll be like, this is the easiest one among all the diseases which you have got, right? But I didn't read the question properly. Like the question went like, high blood pressure is indicated by, and then there were the four options given. The option definitely would have been 140/90, but I didn't even read that there was, the word high over there. I just read blood pressure and I went for the option 120/80. So you definitely should be reading the NCERT line by line to know about it, but it's also very important that you are an apt reader of the question paper as well. Now when you're reading in your home, you can choose to be a good reader, but when you are in the exam hall and you are in a hurry, you know that the physics and the chemistry, maybe you have already flipped the pages through and you've already seen that the physics and chemistry have got certain questions which you're not aware of. You're going to take a lot of time, so you're like, okay, I'll start off with bio, but I'll complete bio very quickly. But when you get to do when you have such kind of mentality, you miss out a lot of important words and you get an entire -5 ready for you. So there should be certain mantras which you should chant to yourself before the exam. For me, it was that do not miss something which you have already done. This was the easiest thing which I could have done. Like I didn't even expect a -5 from there. And it's pathetic. That condition, that situation is pathetic where you miss out on such easy things just because you fail to read one word. So the pen technique, when you are going through the question in the question paper, in case it's an offline test, go through each and every word with your pen. Read the question properly, because after reading you already know what the answer can be. That can be ticked immediately if you have read and revised your NCERT properly. Then getting on to the next three diseases, that is CAD, angina and heart failure. Now these three, when you would read, you would kind of feel like they almost have similar actions, like similar reasons and consequences, but there is a thin line between each one of them. So for disorders, I always say that write down the causes and then using arrows end up towards the consequences, in a proper sequential manner. And you have to do it for every disease, because you need to know how that the cause of every disease is different and the consequences are also slightly different from each other. And towards the end, they talk to you about how heart failure is different from cardiac arrest and a heart attack. So do note those small details, those small differences. Definitely go through the summary in case you tend to find out anything new, right? So that's all for this video, guys. In the next video, we'll be jumping off to one other chapter and discussing about what are the points which are underrated, what are the ways in which you can cover up certain points. Should you make flowcharts or tables, or should you make small notes and stick it on the top of your note page or book, so that you tend to remember? How many times have you got to read and revise? And for the diagrams of this chapter, go through all the diagrams and make sure to look at the labelings properly. Now the heart diagram is a complex one, definitely you don't need to draw it out. Okay, so that's all. Thank you.